Magandang hapon po. Good afternoon, everyone. We're still waiting for a few resource persons to join us. Start to tayo ng mga 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. May we request all the resource person to take their seats? You have your mga nameplates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon po. This meeting is now called to order. And before we begin, let me call on the committee secretary to acknowledge our resource persons for today.
Good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge our guests and resource persons for today's public hearing. From the Department of Energy, Directors Jesus Anunciacion. From the Energy Regulatory Commission, Attorney R.J. Kuwanan. From the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, Attorney Ronald Dilan Concepcion. From the National Transmission Corporation, Mr. Michael Toralba. From the National Power Corporation, Mr. Pio Benavides, the President. From the Department of Trade and Industry, Engineer Mario Gaudiano. From the Department of Transportation, Undersecretary Mark De Leon. From the Board of Investments, Director Evariste Cagatan. From the Land Transportation Office, Attorney Mercy Jane Paras Laines, Mr. Danny Insela. From the Land Transportation Franchising and Regulatory Board, Mr. Joel Bolano. From the Metro Manila Development Authority, Attorney Crisanto Saruca, Director Michael Dison. From the Manila Electric Company, Mr. Lawrence Fernandez. From the Chamber of Automotive Manufacturers of the Philippines, Mr. Alan Rufo. From the BEMAC Electric Transportation Philippines Incorporated, Mr. Kazuo Nagai, Mr. Takahiro Yamasaki, and Ms. May Yanga. Also from the ERC, Engineer Rolando Ibasco. From the Federation of Philippine Industries, Mr. Raul De Alino. From the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industries, Ms. Aliana Manuel. Everyone has been acknowledged, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, ComSec. Once again, good afternoon to everyone. And alam niyo po, excited po ako i-hear tong bill na ito because this bill aims to create another new high-tech industry, which is the electric vehicles. And here in the Senate, there are about 5 bills, including this one that we filed, that deals with electric vehicles. Pero yung 4 po, all talks about fiscal incentives and how to promote e-vehicles, electric vehicles through fiscal incentives. Our version aims to solve the entire ecosystem or the entire supply chain of e-vehicles, including one of the most important components, which is the charging stations. Dahil based on our consultation, even though we give fiscal incentives to import or to manufacture electric vehicles here in the Philippines, kung wala naman pong charging stations, hindi natin magagamit yung electric vehicle. So our version aims to also promote charging stations here in our country. And we all know the various benefits and the various advantages of using e-vehicles. Number 1 is to reduce oil importation. Number 2 is to reduce dollar outflow. Number 3 is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And number 4, creating a new industry creates jobs also. So ito yung mga advantages of promoting e-vehicles or electric vehicles here in our country. And this bill, admittedly, is a work in progress. And that's why we want to solicit your opinion, your comments, your suggestions in improving the bill. We want a bill that is comprehensive, and we want a bill that, at the end of the day, will promote e-vehicles here in our country. But before I begin, I compiled some information, and I just want to direct everyone to the screen. And kagaya po na nasabi ho natin, these are, oops, ano ba ito? Oops, sandali po. Yan. So this is based on the Department of Energy information that almost 50% of our primary energy is imported. So nag-import ho tayo. Karamihan ng ating energy needs galing sa labas. No? And if you break it down, yung imported energy natin, halos 32% is oil. No? And we all know that almost 99% of our petroleum importation is imported. No? And if you look at the consumption of energy, transportation takes up a big chunk, almost 34% of the energy being consumed here in our country goes to transportation. That's why the transport industry is a major industry here in our country, in which it also uses probably almost 80 to 90% of the oil being imported here in our country. But however, when you look at the greenhouse gas emissions, GHG emissions, malaki rin nanggagaling sa transport sector, almost 27%. And this is what we plan to, or this is what we want to target, how to reduce the GHG emissions coming from the transport sector. And obviously, when we electrify our transport sector, malaking impact ho yan sa pagbawas ng GHG or greenhouse gas emissions here in our country. On top of that, since we import 99% of our oil, susceptible ho tayo sa roller coaster ride pag nagfa-fluctuate yung presyo ng langis sa atin. In 2018 was really tumultuous to all of us because we witnessed the rise and fall of prices in petroleum, in gasoline and diesel. Just this year alone, no? In 2019, ang presyo po ng global oil prices slowly inching up, no? And that's why we see a lot of price adjustments in the last few days because the global oil prices are also fluctuating. So one of the direction or one of the benefits of this bill in promoting electric vehicles is to really isolate or at least mitigate the fluctuations in the global oil prices here in our country, because we import almost 99% of petroleum products here in our country. And with that, thank you again very much for joining us. We also invited the Department of Energy, and I know the Department of Energy has been promoting e-vehicles in the past. I've been reading a lot of articles released by the Department of Energy regarding the promotion of e-vehicles. So this committee and the Department of Energy are in unison in terms of promoting e-vehicles and also the entire ecosystem. Remember, though, the e-vehicles is only one facet. Pero yung charging stations, saan ilalagay yung charging stations, that's also one of the more important components of e-vehicles. So with that, we turn over the floor to the Department of Energy, and we want to know kung ano po yung direction ng Department of Energy in terms of e-vehicles and what do we have right now in terms of promoting e-vehicles here in our country.
Good afternoon, Chair, Mr. Chair. The Department of Energy has been promoting the we are promoting electric vehicles as a whole, including other types such as hybrid and plug-in hybrids. We have introduced a project which is the electric tricycle or e-trike, and we are distributing 3,000 units of electric tricycle throughout the country. We are also in the process of establishing policies on charging stations. We would want to have a standard protocol for charging in the Philippines, so that when vehicles would come in the Philippines, they will be actually already aligned with what we have here as charging stations. We have also introduced some units of hybrids, including 45 hybrids as patrol cars in Tacloban and environs, and a number of electric vehicles for promotional purposes in Metro Manila. We know that there are already some charging stations for promotional aspect in several government offices and in some actually service stations. They have these charging stations to promote also electric vehicles. Mr. Chair, ASEC Body Pulido said that we will be sending a revised a position paper next week to express our full support of this bill plus additional input. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And sana meron ho kayong data, no? Because I have a lot of questions to ask you. In the promotion of e-vehicles, I understand, at least at the cabinet level, that it's DOE that will be promoting this, not DOTr. Is that correct? Because we have to also make sure which agency will be in charge of promotion, and then later on maybe regulation and registration. We have to clarify all of this, no? Because since e-vehicles is something new here in our country in terms of mass producing, we want to make sure that the bill covers very clearly the responsibilities of each department also.
In terms of...
Director, pakigamit ho yung ano.
Sir. In terms of transportation or the types of vehicles, we have been introducing electric tricycles because those are not covered by DOTr. We believe that for four-wheel vehicles and above, this will be covered by DOTr since they will require movements or registration to move through national highways, plus if they are used as public utility vehicles, they will require franchise from DOTr. But the whole concept of improving or introducing electric vehicles, the DOE is in the forefront of doing that.
So 4 wheels, 2 wheels, 3 wheels, lahat DOE ang magpropromote.
The whole concept of
The whole concept.
Electric, yes, sir.
Okay, so we will be tasking DOE in the promotion of the e-vehicles. I mean, the
Yes, sir.
entire gamut of the e-vehicles.
Yes, sir.
And then, ano ho mga policy instruments ang na-release na ho ngayon ng DOE in terms of promotion? I read in the papers that you are promoting, but meron na ba ho kayong na-release na mga policy instruments in the promotion aside from the 3,000 e-tricycles?
We have cooperated with Congress in the passage of exemption of excise tax of hybrids and electric vehicles, sir.
That's on the fiscal side. But
Yes, sir.
yung policy aside
Okay.
from the fiscal side, nasa train yan eh.
We are in the process of establishing the protocol for electric charging stations. Because each country has follows a protocol in charging. For example, Japan, they have this CHAdeMO, and other countries also have their own protocols. We'd like to have if possible, a single protocol for the Philippines so that every vehicle, electric vehicles that will come in the Philippines will be following the protocol.
Okay. Aside from itong sa train, the excise tax exemption and the protocol, are there any other policy instruments that DOE released or will release in the next few Months?
Wala pa, sir.
Wala.
Wala pa.
In your study with e-vehicles, no, obviously, ang e-vehicles ho sa atin, kakaunti lang eh. Correct me if I'm wrong, no, but out of the 10.4 million vehicles, we only have 9,000 vehicles considered as electric here in our country. So 0.09% po ang electric vehicles versus the total vehicles here in our country. So, no, less than 1% lang ho yung e-vehicles dito sa atin. And what are the problems that you see in terms of growing this sector?
The industry needs the infrastructure to develop. Specifically, the establishment of charging stations. Because for private electric vehicles, they can be charged at home, but they will have to be charged around 8 hours for a full charge. But if you have charging stations, the fast charger, they can be charged less than an hour, around 15 minutes, so that this will be like having fuel in a service station. So we need to establish this fast charging station so that people will be encouraged to buy electric vehicles.
Definitely charging stations, one of the issues that this bill aims to address. But in your research, paano ho natin ipopromote tong mga charging station? And for example, how many charging stations do we roll out? Where do we roll it out? And ano po yung nakikita nyong strategy on the charging stations?
We still don't have those studies, sir. But there are already interested investors in putting these charging stations along the lines of the service stations, so that but of course they would like to see an environment that encourages electric vehicles.
So wala pa kayong strategy on, for example, if you want to, let's say, all vehicles in the 10% of all vehicles in the Philippines will be e-vehicles. Ilan charging stations ang kailangan natin? May mga ganun ba tayong?
Wala pa, sir.
Wala tayong ganun.
You still don't have that. We have a project with UNDP and DOTr that we will establish that targets. The study would result in establishing how many electric vehicles will be in the future in the Philippines.
Director, kanina na-mention nyo may mga companies interested. No? What are they interested in?
They are interested in establishing charging stations.
So these are utilities or non-utilities?
Non-utilities.
So third-party
Third-party charging
station.
station.
And
Yes,
ano
sir.
ang sinasabi nilang, how come they, no, this is a deregulated industry for now, so they can put charging stations. So ano nagiging problema ho nila?
They are looking for incentives to be granted by the government so that people will adopt electric vehicles.
Anong mga incentives ho yun?
Fiscal incentives and others like what you asked a while ago, targets by the government on the number of electric vehicles within the coming years.
Alam niyo ho kung anong fiscal incentives, Director, ang gusto nila?
Yes, sir. Tax and duty-free importation.
Okay.
Of course, others, such as in other countries, they provide rebates, discounts. The government subsidizes the purchase of electric vehicles.
But we
among
don't
others.
have that, no?
We don't have that, sir.
Okay. No, I want to understand kung anong gusto nila because we can incorporate that in the bill.
Yes, sir.
No, and you mentioned earlier that they also want to see a roadmap.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, wala tayong roadmap ngayon, no?
Yusek Pardelon will have a presentation on that.
Yeah, well,
topic, sir.
later si Yusek, but in DOE side,
Lap.
may roadmap pa tayo.
So,
Like for example, by 2020, 10% of all vehicles electric, may mga ganyan ho tayo.
wala po, sir.
Wala tayong ganyan. Do you plan to do that?
Of course, sir. Yes.
Anong timetable, Director?
I still have to consult with our higher officials.
Okay. And you said, of course, there's a lot of advantages, no? Yung pinakita ko kanina, reduction in importation of fuel, reduction in greenhouse gases. Na-compute nyo na ba ho to? Like for example, if 10% of our vehicles are electric, assuming lang gaano bababa ang importation ng imported fuel natin? At saan ba yung gas, diesel? Meron ba kayong ganun na computation? Wala pa kayong ganun. Sa greenhouse gas emissions, sa carbon emissions, kasi magkatali yan eh. Meron ba kayong computation na ganyan?
Wala po, sir.
So wala pa tayong wala pa tayo. So laway lang yung promotion for now, no?
We use our...
Nabasa ko yun eh.
Yes, sir. we use our...
So laway promotion lang tayo.
No, sir. In the electric tricycles, we have a comparison.
Meron ba?
Yes, sir.
Ba't maliit lang yung electric tricycle? 3,000 lang
Yes, sir.
out of the...
But we have a comparison more or less on the...
Ilan ba ang tricycle sa buong Pilipinas?
8 million, sir, yung motorcycles. We project around 1 million to 2 million tricycles.
So 2 million, 3,000 out of 2 million. So wala siyang negligibly impact ng 3,000.
Wala pa, sir.
But Director, moving forward, we want to see research. Of course, this will not be without opposition. Now, there will be opposition. Let's expect that. But we have to clearly explain the advantages of promoting e-vehicles. I showed you earlier, that's our in-house analysis, but I expect DOE, which is a much larger organization, should have that data. Hindi naman tayo pwede mag-promote ng wala ho tayong basis. No? So, I would like to urge DOE to come up with complete research on why are we promoting e-vehicles.
Yes, sir.
No? And we want to be ready with all of this information and statistics. No? Para kompleto rin ho tayo. No?
Yes, sir, we will do that.
We'll go back to you, Director. Baka si Yusek De Leon meron hong mga sagot. Yusek,
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. The Department of Transportation very much welcomes this proposed bill on electric vehicles. And to report to you, Mr. Chair, that the Department of Transportation is already working with the UNDP along with the DOE and the other government agencies and the stakeholders on developing that roadmap for low carbon transport. When we say low carbon transport, it encompasses not only electric vehicles, but other modes of transportation like the BRT, the walkways, the greenways, the bikeways. It's the whole gamut of low carbon transport. If I can present something, Mr. Chair. So next slide, please. In last 2017, last June, the Department of Transportation signed the Omnibus Franchising Guidelines. And the basic policy in that Omnibus Franchising Guidelines is that the department shall reduce reliance on private vehicle use and move towards environmentally sound mobility solutions. In that Omnibus Franchising Guidelines, which is also again based on the Clean Air Act, which establishes that all new vehicles that will be registered under Philippine use should be compliant at least to Euro 4 standards. And moving forward, not only we are advocating for Euro 4 usage, we are also advocating for the use of environmentally friendly alternative modes of transportation like hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles. So andun na po tayo in a department order policy na yung katulad ng sinasabi nyo kanina, yung policy document na which will serve basis on the implementation of this electric vehicles. So nandun na po tayo sa DOTr. And rightfully so, we have already begun implementing on certain routes under the initial implementation of the PUV modernization, around a dozen or more electric vehicle routes already. As you can see, there are already proponents, Star 8, Isakay, Beep, and other proponents who are really embracing already the electric vehicles as a form of public transportation. Next slide. So now, having said this project,
We recognize the presence of our minority floor leader, Senator Dillon.
next slide. So now we have formed a technical assistance committee project between UNDP and DOTr to formulate this low carbon transport roadmap. Next slide, please. So at first, let me just introduce the problems of being encountered by the sector when it comes to low carbon transport. Number one is indeed we have inadequate policies and programs when it comes to low carbon transport. We lack the regulatory frameworks, as you have been asking us, the departments, what are our policy measures when it comes to electric vehicles. Indeed, kulang pa ang ating mga ahensya ng gobyerno to provide this regulatory frameworks. And also, there's no clear delineation of roles and responsibilities. You were asking earlier, Chairman, if role ba yan ng DOE, role ba yan ng DOTr, because there's no clear-cut delineation of tasking, no, and responsibilities. So, yan yung mga problema natin ngayon. And you were also asking if we have a roadmap. To tell you honestly, sir, wala pa. So this is the major output of this project that we're spearheading right now. So next slide. Also on capacity, awareness, and information, we do lack the capacity, the technical knowledge and skills. There's little interest from some of the private sectors. There's insufficient and market study research. We lack data, as you've been asking earlier from other departments. We lack consolidated data when it comes to low carbon transport. Next slide. Also, there's lack of access to capital. DOE is earlier saying that the private sector has been asking for incentives because probably we lack easy access to funding. So these are some of the problems. Of course, the lack of research and development. Probably there are some schools which promotes electric vehicles, but definitely we lack such policy direction on research and development. Next slide. So the project components, having said these problems, we have identified the components that will supposed to address these problems. So number one is policy support, institutional capacity development, and investment on low carbon transport. So ito na po yung basic objectives, outcomes ng aming proyekto with the UNDP. Next slide. So number one outcome is enforcement of policies and support provided for the promotion of low carbon transport. We will be coming up with policies, programs, draft legislations, and incidentally, ito na yung ating step one, outcome number one. You have already done the outcome number one, and aside from that would be detailed regulations. So itong law na ilalabas natin, we will come up with detailed regulations. For example, LTO can come up with detailed regulations when it comes to registration LTFRB can come up with regulations when it comes to electric vehicles franchising. So yan yung mga possible na lumabas dito sa ating outcome number 1. Outcome number 2 would be adoption and implementation of low-carbon transport plans and programs in major cities. We will be implementing pilot implementation of these programs. We will be crafting master plans on low-carbon transport systems, specifically to major cities and other secondary cities where we can see major impact when it comes to low-carbon transport. So we can select a few pilot cities wherein nakikita natin na receptive yung mga local governments when it comes to such innovative ideas. Next slide. Then outcome number 3 would be we're expecting increased private sector participation and investments. As you have mentioned, we will study possible incentives in relation to, in coordination with DOF. Siyempre, hindi naman pwedeng basta-basta na lang tayo magbigay ng incentives without coordinating first with the Department of Finance. And also, part of the project is possible funding for added studies for market research. Next slide. So, this is just the composition of the committee, the steering committee that is working on this low-carbon transport study. So, involved naman po ang ating mga agencies and stakeholders. In fact, I see most of them here now. So, we have already started with the first project steering committee meeting last month, and we're expecting for more discussions and put more detail in the implementation of this study. Next slide. So these are just some of the deliverables that we are expecting for this 2-year study. So by 2020, we would have developed a policy framework and regulations for low-carbon transport systems. We would have established coordination mechanisms, so we would have clarified the roles and responsibilities of various agencies when it comes to electric vehicles and low-carbon transport. And we can also enhance guidelines when it comes to LGU planning. So we can say to the LGUs to prioritize not only infrastructure, but also zoning and their transportation plans and traffic management. And we would have come up with that roadmap, the low-carbon transport master plan. And we can also implement guidelines when it comes to manufacturers. As we have mentioned earlier, the discussion is what's the supposed standard when it comes to charging stations. Ano mga plug or outlet ang kailangan nating i-adapt as standard. So we are in coordination now with DTI. So kasama sa discussion natin yung DTI Bureau of Product Standards when it comes to plugs, yung mga outlets. So it's very important to have a standard plug outlet so that we minimize yung investment when it comes to infrastructure. Kailangan na yan na maset natin at the start para yung mga succeeding infrastructure and manufacturers of vehicles already implement and adopt that certain standard. Next slide. So we would have developed capacity and planning institutions and investment planning, registration of vehicles, of course the awareness and advocacy program, and we would have established centers of excellence. So yung mga schools, institutions natin, academic institutions and training institutions, it's very important for us to sustain this effort on advancing low-carbon transport and electric vehicles. So, Mr. Chair, that's the presentation we have under our program for the electric vehicle roadmap, specifically the low-carbon transport roadmap. And if I can just suggest, I just read the draft bill last weekend, and the main concern that we have under DOTr is the need to establish an office. Since right now ad hoc lang yung ating office running this program, and multi-agency ang kailangan coordination, I think if it would help if the draft bill can help institutionalize an office within DOTr and put up funds for that for the running of that office. So it's very important to sustain this program. Hindi pwedeng ad hoc committee lang yan or secretariat lang yan. Kailangan talagang may opisina sa DOTr who will run that program. And I also read that we have already identified some initial list of incentives. Probably we can revisit the proposed incentives after we have finished this study. So maybe after 2 or 3 years, we can develop more, if possible, more incentives for the uptake of this low carbon transport systems. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Yusek. So itong UNDP study, nag-umpisa na ho to.
Yes, sir. We have
And then
started.
it will end by 2020.
Yes, sir.
2020.
Yes, sir.
And nasang stage na tayo ngayon? Study.
Right now, we have just finished the preparation of the action planning. So basically, direction setting pa lang nung study ang naumpisahan natin.
So preliminary pa lang.
Yes, sir.
Wala pa tayong makukuhang, let's say, preliminary output that we can work on, or any material that we can use to further improve the measure.
We can share to you, sir, the project document, which was the basis on approving this technical grant from UNDP. That technical document has background studies on low carbon transport, sir.
Okay. And then, pakisubmit na lang po dito sa committee. And then, I think the most basic here, what do you see in terms of setup? Because, again, I read many articles about DOE promoting e-vehicles, but definitely the regulation of that vehicle, registration and regulation, falls under DOTr. And now we found out that DOTr is spearheading this low carbon transport study. So, ano po ang delineation ng relationship? Ben, you also identified in your presentation that indeed, there is a muddled responsibilities between these two agencies. So what do you envision in terms of who will spearhead this type of industry?
As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, yung DOTr kasi is focused on transportation systems. So, and definitely, yung DOTr does not have mandate, for example, on standards. Yung standards po kasi under DTI yan, yung development of standards, it's under Bureau of Product Standards. For example, yung ating mga charging stations. So, it will be an interagency work pa rin. So, DOE for mga charging stations, Bureau of Product Standards, DTI for the standards of the charging stations. So, it will be an interagency work, but DOTr is willing to spearhead this program, being part of our mandate for low carbon transport systems.
And you said, I think one of the most important tools to promote an industry is the fiscal incentives. But this administration clearly has a different view on fiscal incentives. In your information, do we still need fiscal incentives when it comes to e-vehicles? Has it reached a point that itong e-vehicles is already competitive with the internal combustion engine vehicles?
Honestly, Mr. Chair, when we stepped into office last 2016, before we signed the Omnibus franchising guidelines, we came to a point that we almost set a percentage na sasabihin namin dapat 20% ng public transportation fleet dapat electric vehicles. But we held back on that policy direction because of the itong ang limitation ng sector ngayon on electric vehicles. So, to answer your point, Mr. Chair, when it comes to incentives, we can provide incentives, but we can also provide non-monetary incentives as well. So, ano yung mga non-monetary incentives na yan? For example, exemption sa coding. Yan yung mga non-monetary incentives na yan. Like, a certain public transport operator, for example, operates 100 units. 20% ng kanyang unit easily will be not running on a single day because of color coding. So yan yung mga rinirelay na lang sa amin na obstacles when it comes to promotion of low carbon transport system. Mataas na nga yung kanilang capital cost, tapos hindi pa nila mapatakbo yung units. Also, some other incentives would be facilitating yung mga customs because some of these are imported right now. So, yung pag-fast track lang na mag-processing ng kanilang mga papers sa other agencies.
Yusik, I want to isolate, no, and focus on e-vehicles, no, kasi yung low carbon transport marami yan eh. I'd assume meron tong mga, let's say, hybrid or hydrogen or yung mga mass transportation. I would like to concentrate on the e-vehicles kasi yun ang pinakamarami in terms of transportation. And do you have any study right now? No, again, the fiscal incentives is related to the penetration rate of that vehicle, no? Ang sinasabi natin, bibigyan kayo ng fiscal incentive so you can penetrate the market right away. But based on your study, kailangan pa ba yan at this point? Considering that a lot of these e-vehicles, especially China, no, they're mass producing buses, trucks, even vehicles, and the prices are dropping exponentially almost every year, no? But in your study, kailan siya magiging parity with combustion engines? Because that will dictate the incentives, or in this case, the fiscal incentives, if it's warranted or not.
I hope the manufacturing sector can also answer on that question. But in terms of monetary value, if we can only quantify yung cost of emissions ng causing the public health sector, it's already at 1.5% of our gross domestic product according to World Health Organization studies. So it's, imagine 1.5% because of environmental pollution causing health problems. So yan po yung cost of our air pollution right now, caused by polluting vehicles.
What you're saying is the externalities is also a cost that we have to factor in. But in terms of pricing lang ng sasakyan, mayroon ba tayong ganun na study? For example, a Tesla, yung bagong Tesla, ano ba yung Tesla Model 3 ba yun? No? Model is apparently that is meant to serve the mass market, no? But is that an equivalent, let's say, of an internal combustion engine in terms of pricing? Meron ba kayong study na ganyan?
We are not familiar with the pricing of the...
Okay, I think you should make that study,
yes,
because that will dictate if fiscal incentive is warranted or not. If they can compete, then hindi na natin kailangan ng fiscal incentives, at least sa sasakyan, maybe in other things like, you know, charging stations, but we need to know that specifically.
What I can answer, Mr. Chair, is that for public transportation vehicles, yung mga electric jeepneys natin, for example, the pricing is almost the same as the modern PUVs. So as I learned the other month when we launched one route by Isakay Meralco, there's a lot of savings when it comes to fuel cost. Because they're running on electric fuel, electricity, mas stable yung kanilang maintenance and operational expense. Because as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, earlier, yung cost of fuel natin is running up and down. Hindi siya ganun ka-stable, but electricity is somewhat stable. So you minimize yung ating cost ng operating and maintenance using electric vehicles. So when you run a fleet that many, like 100 units, mas makakatipid ka later on using electric vehicles.
Yusek, how about itong, you mentioned in your presentation that we have inadequate policies and programs for electric vehicles. What are those policies and programs that ang nakikita niyong kailangan natin? And also regulation. Kanina ni-mention it also, kulang tayo sa regulation. What are the policies, programs, and regulations that we need to put in place in order to promote electric vehicles?
As mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, yung may mga problema tayo sa, for example, registration ng electric vehicles. Previously, there was one parang nagka-problema yata yung registration ng electric vehicle ng isang certain person. But yan yung isa sa mga problema natin ngayon when it comes to electric vehicles. But I heard that LTO has already addressed this certain problems when it comes to regulations.
But do we need a law to fix that? I mean, you can come up with an internal circular to fix. Right now ba, pag for example, may nag-import ng Tesla, can we register that?
I can, LTO, maybe help me answer. But previously, I heard that when the MVUC law was signed, wala kasi doon yung electric vehicle na na classification. So LTO will made some modification yung sa kanilang registration process. So yun lang po yung naging limitation. But LTO, if you can help me expound on that problem.
Kasi marami kaming, I've talked to some of the stakeholders in the vehicle industry, and they said matagal raw magpa-register, takes months, no, to register. So I think there's some technicalities involved. So,
sir, Mr. Chairman, we would like to clarify that the same requirements and procedures for all other types of vehicles are also followed when it comes to registration of electric vehicles. At present, we have the problem with electric vehicle registration that we have experienced is that there are electric vehicles which do not have, mostly scooters or electric bikes, which do not have engine and chassis number, which do not have chassis numbers, no vehicle identification number, no markings whatsoever, and these do not have custom payments. These are the ones who, which we have a difficulty in registering, because our first requirement for all initial registration is that it has to have payment of customs duties first. This custom payment, proof of this custom payment is electronically transmitted to the LTO by the BOC. Unless there is a custom payment electronically transmitted by the BOC, the LTO cannot register these vehicles, including electric vehicles, sir. At present, sir, we have a handful of accredited manufacturers, assemblers, importers, and dealers of electric vehicles. We have 11 accredited manufacturers, assemblers, importers, and or dealers of electric vehicles. And we have increasing number of registered electric vehicles. In 2018, we have 4,362, of which 3,638 are motorcycle with sidecar. 4,362, sir, for 2018. 62 are electric vehicles for 2018, which is double the number in 2017, which is only about 2,114.
And with your permission, and this 4363 or 4360
4362, Mr. Chair.
are all motorcycles?
No, sir. 3,638 of that is motorcycle with sidecar.
Motorcycle with sidecar. And the
Yes.
rest?
The breakdown, sir. 585 is motorcycle without sidecar. 58 cars, 66 utility
58.
vehicle, 13 SUV, and 2 trucks.
Can I ask some questions? Yes. First of all, let me congratulate our good chair of the Senator Gatchalian for conducting this hearing. This is really an interesting topic. And the first question that I raised to the LTO, you said that at the time the MVUC was passed, there was no electric vehicles yet. That's a fact.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair.
But precisely one of the, a portion of the MVUC is for air pollution. It's a specific portion of the MVUC collection is to address air pollution. There is no air pollution in an electric vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So isn't it logical that you should exempt electric vehicles from the MVUC charges? Firstly, wala naman siya dun sa anong ginawa itong batas na ito. Pangalawa, the MVUC, if you look at the law, the MVUC is designed to address air pollution, in fact, under the supervision of the DOT. Since the electric vehicles do not emit, do not cause any pollution, what is the reason for us to charge MVUC? What would be the rationale? In the first place, it's not in the law.
Sir, if this bill proposing the exemption from MVUC of the electric vehicles, then the
My theory is that it's not an exemption. Electric vehicles are not covered by the MVUC law. Can that be sustained? Because the MVUC is, that's confirmed. Under the, how many billions of pesos do you have for 10 billion pesos which you are not able to use? Oh, you see? So Yusek De Leon is affirming that you have 10 billion pesos in funds for air pollution quality control. Electric vehicles were not there when the MVUC was passed. But more in the second, there is no air pollution insofar as electric vehicles are concerned. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that
yes,
correct?
you are correct, Mr.
Now,
Chair.
why don't you secure an opinion from the BIR to say that it is not covered and there is no reason to impose this motor vehicles users charge because there is no pollution? Then that's already an incentive that you can grant.
Yes, sir. Sir, if I may say
Yes,
something,
please.
sir. In my research, sir, the motor vehicle users charge is historically the road users charge, and it is levied against all motor vehicles that use the public roads, sir. If the electric vehicles also use public roads, then the
I can appreciate.
Yes,
I
sir.
can appreciate where you're coming from, being a revenue-generating office of the government. I am looking at what the chairman is saying. You know, instead of looking for incentives, why don't we encourage them to go into this by looking at possibilities that they are not subject to MVUC and, you know, secure an opinion from the BIR. And you may get a favorable opinion. If you do, then you can exempt them without need of a law. Isn't that possible? I can, as I said, I appreciate where you're coming from, that you have to generate funds. But hindi ba po pwedeng kung tayo ay agree, we agree that this indeed a needed reform. And as the chairman said, difficult to get from the Department of Finance policy decision to grant exemption by law. Why don't you do this? Just try.
Sir, just another try,
Yes.
sir. Also, the present definition since 1964 of what a motor vehicle is, sir, under RA 4136, it still covers electric vehicles, sir. A motor vehicle is any vehicle propelled by any power other than muscular power.
I understand that. But why are you resisting the suggestion? Request for opinion lang yan eh.
Yes, sir.
Para if the response is negative, then you have a basis, stronger basis for collecting registration fees from MBU, from these electric vehicles.
Yes, Mr. Chair, but the LTO will comply with the...
Just a suggestion.
Yes,
You can
yes, Mr.
consider
Chair.
it because ang tendency natin bilang tao ng gobyerno is to regulate eh. That's understandable because you have certain objectives to generate so much. So lahat yan na sources of revenue. Kung po pwede, gagawin natin. Pero kung mayroon namang like if we agree that e-vehicles is good for our environment, maybe that's a policy issue that you can discuss with the BIR and let the DOT. Why don't you take it up and see where will it bring you? Wala ka namang lugi dyan, di ba? On the other hand, that will be the incentive. Now, and while I have the floor, you know, recently, and I'm talking about my city in Iloilo. Recently, there were applications for registration for sidecars of e-motorcycles. It was denied because there is a memorandum now from the DOT that this is not allowed. Is this correct?
Probably, Mr. Chair, you are referring to the joint memorandum circular of DOTr and DILG saying that there will be a moratorium on further issuances of tricycle franchises pending the completion of the local public transport route plans of local government units. And we also limited the application of tricycles along national highway. So that's where that report is coming from.
The limitation of tricycles on national highways is honored in breach than in compliance. We all know that. But I'm just wondering, so you're saying that this refusal to register sidecars of e-motorcycles is part of the general moratorium on issuance of licenses for tricycles. Is that correct?
Sir, if it will be used for public transportation under the local government units, if they are applying for franchises, we have asked DILG again to issue that memorandum circular limiting LGUs to stop providing franchises to tricycles. But if that tricycle will be used for personal use, I think it can be allowed.
Obviously, it's not for personal use. For tricycles for picking up passengers, a public utility. So that's not allowed presently. Not necessarily because it is. My impression kasi is since it is an e-motorcycle vehicle, hindi na pwede i-register. But it's part of the general moratorium.
The rationale behind it, Mr. Chair, is that the local government should finish first its local public transport route plan, wherein it can identify zones where these tricycles can be used or can operate in. So yun po yung idea behind that joint memorandum circular. We want the local government first to identify routes or zones where it can be allowed to operate in.
Why don't you? I'm interested in having this policy pushed Because this is, I think, a key to, one key to, to cleaning our environment. Why don't you qualify that to allow motorcycles with sidecars and designate already the areas where they can operate, number one. Or, number two, if they will retire an existing one and the replacement is this, they should allow, and the replacement is in a vehicle, they should be allowed to register. Can that be done so that at least you will allow these kind of vehicles on the streets?
We will revisit that policy issuance, Mr. Chair, in coordination with DILG. So it's just we are requesting that local government units submit to us their proposed operational plan for these tricycles where it will operate.
But alam mo, Secretary, pag sinabi mo, all right, if you want to substitute this with an e-vehicle tricycle, you might incentivize those tricycle owners to go into e-vehicles. Ang dami yan, ang ingay-ingay pa, ang pollutant pa. You must think out of the box because this is something that I think will benefit the community. Review that because that happened in my province. Now, on a general question, Mr. Chair. In other countries, what policy thrust did they have to encourage the use of electric vehicles? Is there anything that we can look into?
I have read, Mr. Chair, that in other countries, aside from tax exemptions, they provide free parking. Also, some countries which has speed restrictions along highways, they provide unlimited speeds for electric vehicles because some of these electric vehicles can go as very mas mabilis yung kanilang takbo. They provide such incentives to these electric vehicles. There are other incentives like, for example, if the Philippines have that MVUC law, other countries for their environmental tax, they do not need to pay such environmental tax.
Right, they do not have, and all that you require is a BIR ruling, because the BIR is the one who implements this. That's why be open to those suggestions. Do not keep on relying on the Congress to solve your problem. Now, so maybe to help us craft the law, if you can give us a paper on what the other countries are doing. I don't know which one. In Oslo, they have banned all vehicles. In Norway, they have banned all vehicles in the main street. I don't think that we will go into that at this point. Mag-revolution tayo rito pag meron ganon. But this is the extreme. But I'm sure if we review our existing laws, there are a number of matters that we can address since these laws were passed when there was no e-vehicles yet. And one example is the MVUC. You may want to look into that, Mr. Chair, so that, we do not have to grapple with the finance department on the incentives because it's an administrative interpretation that you can resort to. Really, I like when I see on the road a few already of these e-jeepneys. It's maganda, and I don't know how far you have gone there, but I assume the financing is a challenge. The financing is a challenge. So why don't you come up with a scheme that will make financing, that will answer the challenge as part of the incentives rather than a fiscal incentive, some incentive in, I don't know, in financing this acquisition of this vehicle. Now, is the tariff on this e-transport affected by the cost of electricity?
I think DOE or Meralco can.
I'm just curious, because it uses electricity. That's the, yeah?
Thank you, Your Honor. Maybe to the extent that they use energy as an input, but the energy itself, electric energy itself, is already the price of electric energy is regulated by the ERC. But in terms of recovering the cost of the charging infrastructure, the lot, the charging pods, that's not part of the ERC regulation, and I think it's up to the business model of the various commercial establishments on how do they recover that.
What I think I'm leading up to is, can you give us a rundown of why, of the roadblocks towards our going through the successful pursuit of a policy to encourage electronic vehicles? Give us a rundown of what are these problems, because some maybe through administrative issuances can be resolved. Others, so we limit ourselves to what cannot be resolved through administrative issuances. Maybe the Secretary, the DOTr, can give us that rundown, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to bring your, I think, yung slide kanina? I think they have a slide, Senator Dulon, yung slide ng DOTr on the challenges. There.
Mr. Chair, this was the presentation earlier, sir. We have inadequate policies and the programs. This was discussed. We lack regulatory frameworks. Also, we lack the proper delineation of and responsibilities of various agencies. We mentioned earlier that some agencies are mandated to do this, another agency is mandated to do that. So we need to delineate properly the roles and responsibilities of various government agencies. And again, we lack that roadmap.
These are general concerns. Maybe you can come with something more specific to address these challenges that you see.
Yes, sir.
Rather than, just a general statement. Yeah.
And another problem is the lack of technical capacity, since it's just an upcoming technology. So we need more technicians. Probably TESDA can help support some training regulations when it comes to use of electric vehicles. Market survey is currently very limited, so probably we can have such database for market surveys. Next slide would be the lack of research and development, and yun nga, yung lack of access to capital financing. These are just some of the general problems, but since we are doing this study, we will want to put some more details in these problems we are encountering right now.
Maybe with the problems already provided the suggested solutions. And to the extent that it has to be that suggestion must be addressed in the law, then our chair can include that in this committee report. Otherwise, we talk about generalities, walang mangyayari dyan.
Senator Frank, going back to the registration, we can see already some conflict between DOE and DOTr, because DOE, I know for a fact, that has been promoting e-tricycles. In fact, they gave away 3,000 e-tricycles. Pero hindi naman maparehistro dahil meron kayong department order na banning moratorium. So these are the things that we want to resolve, because DOE, on the other hand, is geared towards promoting, and then DOTr, on the other hand, is geared towards regulation, which created problems on the ground. In this case, sa Iloilo po. Yeah.
In terms of consistency, Mr. Chair, one requirement of DOE is for the proponents of yung kanilang mga electric vehicles is to have that LGU plan. So we are already being consistent with each other is for that LGU to submit that operational plan and deployment plan of their electric vehicles. So yun lang po yung kailangan palabas ng kanilang local government units for this electric tricycles to run, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Yusek. We'll go back to you. No, I have some more questions, but we want to also ask the other stakeholders who are here, especially the private sector, who's been really trying hard to promote and to increase the usage of e-vehicles. In this case, we'll go this side muna, no? Si Pio, from any comments, yeah, from NPC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yung importante lang yung environmental concern doon sa mga batteries. Critical yun na kasama dito sa bill na to, yung paano i-dispose yung mga batteries, di ba? Kasi baka kung saan-saan pagdadala yan. The other thing is dapat very clear kung anong standard ng charging station. Kasi sa Australia, multiple standard. Sa iba, dapat may common standard tayo. Yun munang dapat na unahin bago yung iba detalye ng bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pio. Meralco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we support Senate Bill number 2137 as it seeks to establish a policy and regulatory framework to usher in electric vehicles, and especially identifying wider availability of charging infrastructure as a key component in enhancing EV adoption in the country. As one of the key measures to stimulate EV deployment and charging stations, we support the proposal under Section 5 to have a national electric vehicle roadmap to be developed by the DOE. However, we would like to seek clarification as to the scope of the roadmap, as there is an existing electric vehicle manufacturing industry roadmap under the Manufacturing Resurgence Program of the DTI. So these different roadmaps may need to be aligned and at least recognize each other. As a distribution utility, Meralco will continue to work with the DOE and other stakeholders in crafting the roadmap and the corresponding charging infrastructure development plan. To ensure grid readiness for electric vehicle charging, Meralco currently conducts research and development and testing on EV charging technologies to gain first-hand knowledge. We actively collaborate with the different stakeholders. We are a member of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines to coordinate with them on the different barriers, on removing different barriers to EV entry. And for interested parties, we provide site assessment services for proper grid connection of their charging station. We also participate in the development of EV standards, including charging standards, and such as the sockets for electric vehicles, and supplier accreditation to ensure safe and reliable connection to the grid. And as a good corporate citizen at BU, we upgrade our grid infrastructure to support the efficient, safe, and reliable accommodation of loads from electric vehicle charging stations. To complete the EV ecosystem, we launched in July 2013 our first EV charging station in the Meralco compound, serving both as a technology showcase and a test bed for all types of EV charging technologies. So we have AC slow charging, we have DC fast charging. We also have solar and wind power charging pods in the Meralco compound. We also have 3 e-bike charging stations inside our offices. Related to the different kinds of charging stations, we observed that many commercial EV users use AC-based charging stations. So these are relatively low-power charging stations, and they typically charge vehicles they count it in hours, so 2 to 16 hours. And these are usually used for public utility vehicles. But with new EVs, with higher battery range, and the need for DC fast charging becomes more important. So for DC fast charging, the demand on the grid can be counted in the tens up to the hundreds of watts already, hundreds of kilowatts already. And the vehicle can be charged in less than 1 hour, in some cases as in less than 10 minutes. So this will have, the DC fast charging stations will have a correspondingly significant impact on the power quality of the grid. Thus, its deployment needs to be well planned and coordinated with the incumbent or the local distribution utility. In this regard, we see a possible policy gap as the DUs are being required to submit a charging infrastructure development plan, but third-party service providers are not covered by the CIDP. So in general, we support the bill. We will work with Congress and other stakeholders in preparing a reliable and efficient charging infrastructure and in preparation for the wider adoption of electric vehicles in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. What's the difference between Isakay and Meralco? I know it's a sister company, no?
Mr. Chair, Isakay is actually a fully owned subsidiary of Meralco.
Okay.
And it's dedicated to propagating electric vehicles for both private and public sector customers.
When you say propagating electric vehicles itself or the infrastructure for?
Both, Mr. Chair. No? So in some situations, some of our customers may require electric vehicle services. We provide that. USEC Mark De Leon mentioned earlier that we had launched earlier this year our fleet of e-jeeps, currently plying a route between Mandaluyong City Hall and the Buendia MRT station. So we've since deployed 15 electric jeeps to ply that route. So these are some examples of the projects that we undertake as a company.
Raymond, do you want to continue and give your position
Yes.
on the bill?
Actually, Mr. Chair, similar to many of the stakeholders around the room, we are very pleased that this bill is being raised for approval and being discussed. Just some notes on some of the questions you had asked earlier. I think you had a question around adoption of electric vehicles, and indeed a significant barrier is the cost of electric vehicles vis-a-vis their ICE counterparts. In some cases, the ICE counterparts are less than half the cost of these electric vehicles. However, I think the metric that is very germane and relevant to this discussion is not necessarily just acquisition cost, but the total cost of ownership. I think USEC Mark alluded to this earlier. In as much as the acquisition cost is significantly higher for electric vehicles over a certain period of time, say 5 or 10 years, you would think that you would be able to recover that acquisition cost delta because electric vehicles cost less to run per kilometer vis-a-vis ICE vehicles. And the maintenance cost of electric vehicles is also significantly lower. There aren't a lot of moving parts. In fact, what needs to be replaced in an electric vehicle is typically the battery, which is the most significant portion, the wheels, as well as the brake pads. Apart from that, there's not much maintenance to be done. So I think that's the point that I would like to highlight, which brings me to the point that financing is very important, particularly for public utility vehicles. And I think the DOTr has, as part of the Public Utility Modernization Program, a very attractive financing package. It's called the Pasada Loan Program. And I think it's embodied by their 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of slogan or title. It means that, let's say an operator is required to only put up 5% equity when securing financing for an electric vehicle, 6% interest, 7 years to pay, so 5, 6, 7, and then the 8 refers to an 80,000 peso subsidy for anyone that applies for this program. So I think it's a very attractive package and really kind of eases the adoption of electric vehicles. That's for, however, it's limited only to I think, four-wheeled vehicles at the moment. Tricycles will have to go through their own routes in terms of securing financing for their purposes. I think the second point I'd like to make, based on a question you had asked earlier, Mr. Chair, was why third-party operators may, we don't see a lot of third-party operators operating charging stations. I think there are two constraints. Obviously, on the supply side, there are some constraints because the cost of charging stations are are still quite high today, in the same way that the cost of electric vehicles are high. But I think the bigger constraint right now is a demand constraint. Even if you put out charging stations out there, there currently aren't a lot of electric vehicles that will charge. The electric vehicles that we see out on the road today, primarily smaller electric vehicles and public utility vehicles, are able to charge using slow charging mechanisms, or AC charging, as Mr. Fernandez mentioned earlier. Those that require fast charging or DC charging are typically the electric cars, as well as bigger electric vehicles such as buses. So as an example, if you recall last year, Mr. Chair, you had inaugurated a fast charging station on EDSA, which was deployed by UniOil. My understanding is since that time, which is about 9 months ago, only a handful of vehicles have actually charged, which means it's a good project. But then again, a company that will be focused on securing income from such installations will not be able to do so, at least in the near term, given the lack of demand. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Raymond. Raymond, you mentioned earlier the cost of charging stations, no? But I would assume the charging stations are much cheaper than building a gas station, no? Because a charging station is just one pod and you can virtually put it anywhere, no?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. So, as opposed to a gas station where you would have to set up an entire facility, charging pods can exist pretty much anywhere. When I say that the cost of charging pods is relatively high, I'm referring to the actual pod itself, vis-a-vis, let's say, another gas facility. And that, again, at least on a gas facility, you have some sense of the demand that will be served by that gas station. You have some level of certainty. If you set up a charging station, whether in a mall or in a gas station and co-located, who knows when somebody will charge.
But Raymond, this is a chicken or the egg question eh. Without the station, walang bibili ng sasakyan. Kung wala kang sasakyan, wala kang kakabit. So how do we break that cycle? No? How do we get the private sector like Isakay to invest in charging station, and then users of e-vehicles will follow suit?
Yeah,
no?
That's exactly right. That's the dilemma that market participants face. So I think an entity like Isakay would be encouraged to deploy charging stations out there with a little bit more clarity on when electric vehicles, particularly those that charge on fast chargers, will come. And I think the bill with the incentives for electric vehicles to come will be indeed a good boost to that, or at least provide some clarity when we create business cases for setting up these charging stations. So right now, absent that, Mr. Chair, we are deploying vehicles in lockstep with the charging stations, and then hopefully as we deploy more vehicles and their corresponding charging stations, we can at least slowly but surely get to critical adoption and critical mass.
In your opinion, I guess the charging station should come first, no? Before we will see a significant uptake of e-vehicles.
I agree, Mr.
And
Chair.
what do we need to encourage private sector to invest in the charging stations?
I think some of the fiscal and non-fiscal incentives you've identified in the bill would in fact encourage the setup of charging stations. Combined, it's a twin kind of incentive. It's got to happen at the same time. So both the charging station incentives, such as open access to gas stations, requirements for certain buildings to have charging stations, all of these would help charging station providers to really invest in this. But at the same time, again, the demand issue on who will charge is still the biggest question that charging operators will.
In the bill, we put some provisions on mandatory parking for e-vehicles and mandatory charging station for buildings. Now, for example, kagaya itong GSIS, in the bill calls for the installation of charging stations. And eventually, if the bill gets approved, all of the buildings and establishments will be mandated to put charging stations. Will that help?
That would very much be a
But
boost.
will Isakay like yourself be encouraged to invest first? Kasi again, the chicken or the egg. We need to
Yes.
break the cycle and encourage private sector to put in the charging stations first.
Again, Mr. Chair, access to these facilities would definitely help, because that is a current barrier that that we face today. But then again, when you run the business case, again, the question mark will still be who will charge. But then again, if there is a discussion between potential charging station operators and, let's say, the Nissans, BMWs, and Mitsubishis of the world to bring in these units, then I think there's greater comfort for operators to do so. Because again, I think what needs to be highlighted is these charging stations will, in most cases, at least what we've seen in other countries, they're used as a backup facility. Most of the charging for electric cars happens at home. It happens at home or in the workplace, because this is where cars are normally parked for long periods of time. And if you look at the ranges of these vehicles, you have ranges of up to 200 kilometers on a single charge. You can imagine a car owner charging at night on Sunday, and then having a full charge ready to go on Monday morning. And if the commute is 20 kilometers or 40 kilometers round trip every day, theoretically that car can run for the next 4 days without trouble. So really the charging stations become sort of a backup facility in case they run out of fuel or charge during their commute. So typically you would find these charging stations, again, in gas stations, in malls, as we've seen in other countries, or you would also see them in expressways, because this is where you'll need to alleviate what you call the range anxiety on your vehicles. So I think that's also one thing that a charging station company might think of. They could set up a charging station. The vehicles might come as a result, but the question is, will those vehicles truly charge? I guess it remains to be seen.
In the bill, we included charging entities can be as part of the IPP, the Investments Priority Plan. So they will get incentives under the BOI law. And then we mandated the buildings, facilities to have allocated space for charging stations. Will those help in terms of encouraging private sector to come into the charging station?
Those would definitely help, Mr. Chair.
And that will break the cycle.
That will help break the cycle. That will help break the
Anything
cycle.
else?
I guess that the reason I say help is because, again, I go back to the question of the charging stations will still have the market risk.
Correct.
They still face the market risk. What we're addressing through the components of the bill are supply side issues. Easing the installation, easing the importation. That's good. That's one part of the equation. The demand risk is a function of the adoption of electric vehicles, which, as I said earlier, is addressed by other components of the bill.
Thank you, Raymond. We'd like to hear from Mr. Yamasaki of
Yes.
BMAC.
Can I use the my presentation material? Is it okay?
Yes.
No, BMAC. Thank you. Check. Already. Okay, next please. Yes. So we are from the BMAC Philippines, and we are the manufacturer and the distributor for the three-wheel electric vehicle. And we produce already the 600 units plus 3,000 units for 69 VM. Our original model called the 68 VM, that is 600 units, to Boracay and Manila City. And then we have also DOE model, we call the 69 VM, and then that is 3,000 units. And then we have the plant in Carmona, Cavite, and then production capacity 500 units per month. Next, please. This is the 68 VM sales area. We deliver more than 600 units. And next, please. This one is a DOE model. So among the 3,000 unit contract with DOE, we finished deliver the 940 units. So this week or next week, we deliver to the Valenzuela city and then also Quezon city. Next, please. So this is LTO compliance. So that we comply to the LTO requirement. So all of our unit is registered in LTO. Next, please. So this is a case study in the Manila City. So we delivered the 280 units to Manila City, and then we sold to the Manila City, meaning the asset belong to the Manila City. And then we have the 5 charging station that is covered by Manila City. And then also it's a free operation. And then fare is 20 peso per person. So the driver's income like 800 to 1,400 peso. And then because asset belong to the Manila City, so that's why driver need to pay the Manila City one day 150 peso. So meaning the driver's income in cash in hand, it's increased a lot. So that's why the many driver want to drive this e-tricycle right now. Next, please. So this is the Boracay island, because we deliver 187 units, because here is kind of unique area, because driver's income is very high. So that's why they can cover the cost of the e-tricycle. So you can see the driver's income per day, like 3,000 to 3,500 peso. It's pretty high. Next, please. So this is a comparison table. Maybe many people interested in. So this is a comparison table for the tricycle, gasoline tricycle, and then the electric tricycle. Please focus on the gasoline consumption. Per day is like 250 peso. And then on the other hand, e-tricycle is only 50 peso. Because as many people said, fuel consumption here is very expensive. And then our maintenance cost also the cheaper than gasoline tricycle. This is data from the survey of JICA and then NEDO project. So this is the actual number of the data. So totally around 110 peso daily cheaper than operation cost compared to the gasoline tricycle. Next, please. And then this one is a comparison table of the emission compared to gasoline tricycle and the electric tricycle. And the PM 2.5 almost prevented emission percentage more than 75%. And then also CO2, also the 70% we can reduce. This one is also the resource from the UP survey from the JICA project. So this is the actual data. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Yamasaki. And but these are all LGU, no? These are not commercially sold to the drivers. These are all LGUs.
No, Manila City, yes, it's LGU. But in Boracay, we sold to the driver.
And you have a plant here.
Yes, we have.
You produce all of those tricycles.
In the Philippines.
Okay. How many have you produced already? How many have you produced?
Right now, 3,000 plus 600. So the total is 3,600. More than that.
More than that. That part of that is the ADB project.
ADB project, yes.
Because that's almost 3,000.
3,000, yes.
Right. Okay.
So aside from the ADB, we have like 600 delivered to the local market, like Boracay and the Manila City and JICA, Quezon City.
How much is one tricycle?
One tricycle is 495,000 peso.
How much is a ordinary tricycle?
Ordinary is like 200.
So how do you
convince?
Correct. How do you convince?
Yeah, that one is
almost
like
double.
Yes. So normally the tricycle driver is interested in only the daily income. So that's why I show you the comparison table of daily base. So for example, daily base, they are less than maintenance cost and they are less than fuel cost. That's why daily income is increased. So that's why they don't care about the total year, like 5 years or 3 years. They just do care about daily income. So that's why if their daily income is increased, they are very happy. So we try to convince like that way.
So who pays the upfront cost? Who pays the 400,000?
For example, the Boracay case, it's driver.
400?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Manila case, it's Manila City. It's kind of subsidiary.
Okay. How about financing? Is it available?
Right now we try to make up the financing scheme for the driver because this B2C business is the main market here.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Masaki. Eva, Mr. Bona.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. We actually prepared a presentation. Please allow me to present it. So in addition to the position of EVAP in some of the provisions, I'm also presenting an overview of what's currently happening and some data which I believe would answer some of the questions raised earlier. Okay. Yeah, so I'll be discussing the electric vehicles, global and local updates. Then I'll be discussing the cost-benefit analysis that DTI commissioned a group of universities to work on. And then the local EV industry challenges, solutions menu, and some comments on the pending bill. Okay, next slide. So I think everyone knows EVAP. The main vision is to promote electric vehicles used throughout the entire archipelago. Yeah, so the trend indicates that indeed electric vehicles are growing all over the country, all over the world. And the countries have already identified targets. And the question now, I think it was raised also earlier, how about Philippines? What's the target for the Philippines? Yes. Yeah, even our Southeast Asian countries have also identified their targets. So you have in there the targets of the different countries, and also provided there are the status of the electric charging stations locally, and also in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Okay. Okay, next slide. Okay, so currently, by the way, this is 2017 data. I believe that there's now a newer set of data for 2018. But in 2017, there was a total of 1,420 e-trikes registered, 64 electric cars, and then you've got electric utility vehicles, 89 electric motorcycles, 952. Currently, okay, there's a total of 210 electric vehicle models for 2- and 3-wheelers, 20 models for e-trikes, and 15 models for e-jeeps and e-buses available locally. Yeah. So for the charging stations, you have those put up by Unioil in Congressional Avenue and also one in EDSA. QEV have targets also to set up facilities, charging facilities in partnership with the SMOs, and of course Meralco with DTI and at DNR. Yeah, there has been a lot of questions on the fuel economy of electric vehicles. So if you review the U.S. city driving electric vehicles, you have in there the range of the electric vehicles, the different variants of electric vehicles. And on the right, we did in the study commissioned by DTI with the different universities. We did actual testing of a number of electric vehicles available in the country, and this is actually what we saw. Electric vehicle fuel economy locally is 3 to 16% higher compared to that of the U.S. So factoring that factor, we get to the right side now, the projected local city driving electric vehicle fuel economy for the Philippines. Now looking at the local vehicle fuel economy, we did a survey among electric vehicle members. Okay, so these are claims by the suppliers. Okay, and we see on the left side the different fuel economy for the different classes of electric jeepneys, and on the right is the one for tricycles. And putting in the existing energy costs and fuel costs, you see in there the comparison on the bottom right. The energy cost per kilometer for Class 1 electric jeepneys is 1.6 to 2.7 per kilometer. This is the energy cost, compared to the ICE of 5.25. Class 2 is 3.4 to 5.3, compared to 8.4 of ICE. After the tricycles, you get the 0.38 to 1.20 per kilometer for the EV, and 1.67 pesos per kilometer for the ICE. Okay, next slide. Yeah. The one that I showed there is for battery electric vehicles. Okay, on this slide, this shows now the fuel economy for plug-in hybrids. So hybrids could run in electric drives, or they could also run in ICE drives. Okay, and based on the US data we have in here, the fuel economy for each for the different drives. And the overall fuel economy depends on how much would the share of electrics compared to the ICE. Okay, studies in the US, okay, and in Europe came out with a graph shown on the upper right. Okay, it indicates that for the different battery range, you have the corresponding electric drive share. So even though, for example, you have only a 35 kilometer battery drive share for plug-in hybrids, Okay, that actually results to around 60% electric vehicle share. Bakit naging ganun? Because normally ginagawa lang naman is enough already to bring the person to the office and back and then charge at home. So they only use the ICE side, the ICE drive during emergencies and also during weekends when they do long drives. So if we assume that a similar trend is followed in the Philippines, okay, then you have in here now on the lower right the corresponding range of fuel economies, okay, for the different vehicle variants. Okay, next slide. Okay, cost. We need earlier there was discussions of the life cycle costs. So we need also. Oh no, this is just first the initial cost. So we the DTI study also broke down, okay, the sales cost of electric vehicles. You have in there the different for 2019 subcompact car cost, for example. You have in there the cost breakdown for a Euro 4 ICE, BEV, and PHEV electric, and on the lower part you have there the cost for the mid-size SUV cost. So as you will see there, the high cost of electric vehicles is mostly traced to the vehicle cost, which in return also increases your importation tariff and your excise taxes. Okay. So currently, electric vehicles cost significantly higher compared to ICE vehicles. Okay, on the right, it provides you a summary of the range of local cost multipliers compared to the ICE. So it means, for example, for a compact sedan, a compact electric vehicle sedan would cost you 1.81 to 2.36 times that of an ICE. Okay, and then you have there the other cost. Okay, next slide. Yeah, local charging cost. In Europe, it was mentioned earlier by Mr. Ravelo that that normally people would charge at home. Okay, and that is validated actually by data from Europe. In Europe, it shows that 84.5% of electric consumption of electric vehicles were charged at home, and around 9.9% using slow personal chargers, and 2.8% using slow public chargers, and around 2.8% using slow public chargers. Okay. It's important to break down or understand very well the difference of these charging options, because there's actually an impact on the charging cost. You see in there the cost comparison of the different charging facilities. This is add-on cost. This is on top of the per kilowatt hour cost. So if you look at, for example, fast charging systems, okay, that would add around 13 pesos over and above the per kilowatt cost. That's why in Europe, people seldom charge in fast chargers because it's costly. They rather charge at home. So, kung ang tanong is our charging facilities important? Yes. They're not necessary to use electric vehicle, but they're important to encourage the purchase of electric vehicles, because we need to hurdle the range anxiety issue, and having electric chargers all around greatly addresses that issue. Okay, next slide. Okay, life cycle cost. Okay, in this graph this shows you the comparison of the life cycle cost of the different technologies for the different variants. As you will see there, ICE still provides you the lowest life cycle cost. Okay, next. And next. And this could be broken down as follows. So, tingnan natin kung ano yung laman, ano? So for the ICE, bulk of the cost is attributed to energy cost. Okay, this is, by the way, over a 15-year life. While for the BEV, it's the vehicle cost. And the energy costs of BEVs and PHEVs are a lot lower that of ICE. Okay, and then eventually you have the maintenance costs. Okay. Okay, while it is said that it's cheaper to maintain electric vehicles, okay, the difference is a lot lower than what is normally projected. If you now take into account, okay, next. If you now take into account the cost of battery replacements, so you would now see those cost comparisons. Okay, this is for a mid-size SUV. Okay, similar trend. Okay, next. Yeah, and then you have in there also the difference in maintenance cost. Okay, next slide. Now, life cycle cost projections. What's going to happen in the future? The main thing with the electric vehicles, bulk of the cost is attributed to the cost of the battery, and the cost of the battery is projected to decrease significantly in the future. And that is expected to decrease the cost of the electric vehicles. Okay, so you see in there what's the effect on the different technology variants. Okay, for a compact sedan and for a mid-sized SUV. Okay, slide. Yeah. So as you will see in here, for a BEV, for a battery electric vehicles, it would have cost parity with ICE, okay, by 2025. Okay. So right now it's still more expensive. Okay, we're talking about life cycle cost, and for the PHEV, the cost parity would come, okay, a bit later in 2030. Okay, but for a mid-size SUV, basically it's for the mid-size SUV, the cost parity for PHEV are expected to be obtained by in 2025. While okay, it's the other around, but for the BEV, okay, it's a bit longer. Okay, and this is attributed to the increased size of the bigger size of batteries in bigger vehicles. Okay, next. Yeah, social cost benefit analysis. So a study done by DTI together with the different universities. He also did a comparison to social cost benefits. Okay, BEV, PHEV, and ICEVs. So okay, the results are shown there. This is for the 2019 values. Okay, next. Okay, and if you look at the breakdown, okay, bulk of the benefits of the benefits of electric drives are traced to their to their greater balance of payment benefits. Okay, so you save a lot of money, save a lot of money by avoiding the importation of fossil fuels, and to some degree also energy cost. Okay, it could not be very well be seen in the slides, but if you look at in more detail the health cost. The health cost difference of ICE, PHEV, and ICEVs are very much far from each other. You obtain a lot of health cost benefits from BEVs and PHEVs. Okay. In terms of energy security as well, you obtain a lot of benefits. But in terms of greenhouse gas social cost, it depends actually where you're charging. If you're charging in National Capital Region, you actually produce more greenhouse gases, a little bit, but you're charging in Luzon and Visayas, you get a lot of, in Visayas and Mindanao, you get a lot of savings. So the Visayas and Mindanao, you have around 50% renewables. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, next slide. Okay, compact sedan, cost of benefits. Okay, so it's shown there. Yeah, next slide. So you see there now, this slide shows now the trend, because this compares now the cost and benefits analysis of the variants, okay, that will be rolled out in the years to come. So what's going to be the effect of technology improvements in BEVs? As you will see there, okay, it's expected to translate to lower taxation. Okay, why? Well, it's basically because reductions in cost of batteries are expected to bring down the cost of the vehicles, and that also bring down the cost of taxes. Okay, while for ICEs, okay, ICEs are expected to increase in prices in the future, and that also increases the corresponding taxes. Okay.
Mr. Bona,
yes,
we can we have lots of resource persons, so we can. Kung pwede po, let's go straight to the point.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so why EVs in the Philippines? I think all these things are very back up in the data that I've showed earlier. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Challenges. Okay, we broke down the challenges into three: vehicle, charging, and industry. For the vehicles, you have high cost and low affordability. Financing is set to be institutionalized. Vehicle standard classification are harmonized across the different concerned agencies. Lack of vehicle technical verification program, lack of facilities to operationalize vehicle and part standards, lack of EV technicians and know-how, and lack of charging infrastructure. Okay, next slide. For the charging facilities, okay, you have in there the different issues identified by the association. Okay, next slide. And for the industry development, okay, these are the issues identified by the association. Okay. Now, if you look at this slide now shows the different recommendations. Okay, on the second column provides you the status. Okay, the one with the shade of a cream indicates that something is being done. Okay, the next three columns provide you which aspect is it affecting, and okay, the last column provides you which items are being addressed by the Senate bill. Okay, so as you will see there, the Senate bill addresses major points, okay, of the major points of the issues, but there's still also a lot of other components that needs to be addressed.
Mr. Bona, what you're saying is, can you go back to the other? In order to have a successful electric vehicle industry, is all of those should be green. Yun nasa right side.
Yes, yes, and also the status, of course, everything should have been addressed.
Okay,
Okay,
so
some would be very their significance are not actually equal. Okay, but these are things that are suggested to be addressed.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, next slide. And these are now some recommendations and clarifications on the provision. So for Section 5A, suggested to explicitly include DTI and DNR, because we believe that they play a major role. Section 5B, this is a clarification. The franchise provided to the DUs covers only the distribution of power. Do the provision intend that they shall be eventually allowed to operate charging stations? In Section 5, in addition to standards, it is recommended that DTI shall also be the lead agency in the EV industry development and crafting of fiscal incentives. It should also assist DOE in the crafting of the EV roadmap. And Section 9, it is recommended to stipulate and enumerate the financial package for electric vehicles, possibly including tariff-free importation of vehicles, a class of charging equipments, and the selected parts. And Section 14 is recommended that guidelines on the co-location of charging points and fueling stations be developed and enforced to ensure public safety. Okay, so thank you.
Sir Bona, if there are three things that you can suggest to make up for a successful electric vehicle industry, ano po yung tatlong bagay na dapat po gawin ng gobyerno?
Okay, number one, it has to address the registration issue right now. Because that also puts on hold the movements of the auto industry, especially the OEMs. Okay, we did a workshop with the different agencies. Okay, and we found out that the main issue is that vehicle classification standards utilized by the different agencies are different from each other. So the Bureau of Customs are using a different specifications of vehicles. Okay, the LTO are using also a different classification of vehicles. DPS, BOI are also using a different classification of vehicles. So it's important that all of these things be harmonized. When it's done, then registration could be easily facilitated. Okay. The second would be, as you will see, the major issue really is the high cost of electric vehicles. So reductions in tariff should be closely considered. Okay, and on the charging facilities, as you will see also, okay, the charging costs are actually significant. So incentives and programs should also be put in place to address those. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. When you say registration, kanina we talked about that. What do you mean by registration issue?
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes if you have an electric vehicle, you're able to register it smoothly. Sometimes you're not able to register it smoothly. So we met with the different agencies: Bureau of Customs, Tariff Commission, LTO, and DTI, and based on the discussions zero in on the fact that the different agencies classify vehicles differently. That's why you're using different forms. You receive bottlenecks. You encounter bottlenecks during registration. Right now, what LTO is doing is to just use the minimum, the closest answers to the form. For example, number of cylinders. We would use 1 because that's the closest to having 0. So power ratings. So they would use also a different item. So if only that could be addressed, that would greatly facilitate the vehicle registration. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bona. Mr. Rufo, any comments po? Sa ano kayo, 'di ba?
Sa CAMPI po.
CAMPI.
Sa Chamber of Automotive Manufacturers of Philippines. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Generally po sa CAMPI po, we support your bill 2137, but we'd like to request the good senator to allow us to submit a position paper in reaction to your bill. Also, generally, with regards to the charging, okay, we basically support the charging, and we like also to inform that for the automotive industry, we have two kinds of vehicle: the hybrid, which does not require charging, and the electric vehicle, which requires charging. So both are available from our industry. Also, when it comes to your earlier question with regards to the parity of the cost of the vehicles, we do agree with most of the comments of the other resource speakers that there's still a big difference between the cost of a conventional vehicle and an electric or hybrid vehicle. So we still like to request the good senator to continue to put incentive measures in order to make this to a parity and make it viable for the public, for these EVs and hybrids to be made available for our consumers. That's all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Kailan nyo nakikita? I looked at the Bloomberg analysis, and prices of batteries dropping. So, but in your expert opinion, kailan po magiging parity ang internal ang combustion engine vehicles and EVs?
Actually, Chairman, the basis of the parity will be in terms of volume of vehicles produced. That will really dictate it. Plus the cost of the materials, particularly the biggest factor of the cost is the battery, and the battery are made from a resource that is limited, like lithium ion. Okay, in this case, we do not have right now a study by CAMPI when it will become the same, but it can be either from 10 years from now. That will be just a ballpark figure, just to respond to you right now.
So you recommend is to put incentives for importation or manufacture
Importation, manufacturing, and even the utilization of these vehicles.
to make them more affordable.
More affordable, parang maging at par between the internal combustion or the conventional vehicles and these kind of vehicles. Okay. Because we still do understand from other countries like United States, they still put subsidies, China and other ones. So they still have this problem that parity difference right now at other countries. We might still have to adapt and to make it viable here.
Thank you. And Mr. Dalino? Yeah, sorry. Malabo na yung mata ko eh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Federation of Philippine Industries support this Senate bill, as we are also supporting the House bill that's also being discussed in the lower house. And we appreciate the focus on the charging stations at the same time in the vehicle acquisition. But the major component of the cost, I think, is the battery. And right now, the lithium-ion battery is still in a quandary on how these batteries will be handled. Globally, there are only a few recyclers of these batteries. So therefore, we don't have yet that problem. But once this program picks up, that will be a major issue, because right now there is no, not yet a viable recycling of these lithium-ion batteries. Unfortunately, the lead-acid batteries will be a very it's not a good alternative to the lithium-ion battery because of the weight of the batteries compared to the weight load of the vehicles. So it's going to be a major issue later on. So maybe also focus on the battery industry to be given attention to, including the recycling part of it. Because right now, the Philippine battery industry is just on the lead-acid battery, as well as the other ASEAN. And we also recommend that we benchmark already with those countries in the ASEAN region particularly, which already embarked on their EV roadmap, like Malaysia. They're already in the 10-year implementation of the roadmaps, and right now I think what I've heard is they're already assessing the incentives that have been given. So what we're imagining is now happening in the other ASEAN countries, more advanced. So we'll have that advantage of benchmarking with their experiences. So as I said, Federation of Filipino Industries support this bill, and we would be submitting a position paper on the basis of the first draft of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delino. Attorney Concepcion of NGCP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, we'd like to congratulate the chairman for filing this initiative. I think it is as timely as it is urgent, considering the state of our environment. My only comment here, Mr. Chair, is that we are looking towards the end of the spectrum where the users are considered. I would like to ask that the grid also be considered, because the reliability and the capacities that are offered to service these electric vehicles might be affected. So can we imagine, for example, if all of the electric vehicles on the road right now will be replaced by EVs? How would that affect the supply or the management of the grid? So in fact, going over the bill, Mr. Chair, the transmission development plan was not mentioned. So I think we should also involve the system operator in crafting this bill, so that the PDP as well as the TDP as well as the distribution development plans of our DUs will be considered in the implementation of the law, in case this is passed into law, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney Concepcion. Ms. Lim of DOF, kayong comments? Alam ko na yata comment nyo, fiscal incentives yan, I'm sure. So, but, sige po, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
This is compliant to train, kasi BOI ho to eh. Mandatory inclusion lang.
Except for the proposed MVUC exemption, Mr.
Meron pa rin? Sige.
Although we don't have an official position paper yet, but same with LTO, we pose objection on the proposed MVUC exemption.
Thank you, ma'am. But I think I'll subscribe to what Senator Drilon mentioned earlier, no, the concept of kasi what he was saying is part of the use of the fund is to mitigate pollution, no? And the logic there is because e-vehicles does not produce pollution, so it should not be taxed accordingly. So that is the logic there. But we'll take note of your comments, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we will submit an official position
Okay,
paper.
thank you, thank you. This side naman po, ERC, Attorney Kunanan. Kuanan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The Energy Regulatory Commission would like to extend or support its support to this proposed legislation, Senate Bill number 2137. We allow this objective in trying to address also the development in the challenges in the development of electric vehicle industry in the Philippines. Now, we believe that for us to effectively address these challenges, we have to come up with a clear policy and regulatory frameworks for us to encourage electric vehicles and the establishment of electric charging station in the country. Now, I'd like to, I'm actually glad to inform the chair that as we speak right now, the commission is already on its second draft of its proposed rules for registration and licensing of charging station services, Your Honor. And in fact, based on our timeline, hopefully we can publish the same by the end of the second quarter, and hopefully we can get unsolicited comments and suggestions from the other stakeholders there, Your Honor. And we will be submitting also our official position paper.
Attorney, I just want to focus on the responsibility of ERC here, in which it will regulate the rates being charged by the regulator to the charging station, distribution utility to the charging station. But the charging station to the vehicle is unregulated. And the logic behind that is because kung marami hong maglalagay ng charging stations, imposible naman i-regulate nyo lahat ng charging station na mag-a-apply. That's virtually impossible. Especially if you mandate all buildings that will put up their own charging station. So we patterned this after California, in which the third-party operators or the third-party charging stations are unregulated. Laban-laban sila doon. But the DUs to the charging stations, yun na lang re-regulate. What's your comment on that?
Well, actually, sir, it's just similar to, we treat the electric station, energy station, as in ordinary end-user consumers. Typically, parang ganun yung magiging concept niya. Unless and until this energy station has its backup or generating facilities within its premises, then that's another story.
So, but this concept, are you amenable to this concept? That from the charging station to the vehicle, to the end user, it's unregulated?
Actually, I think, sir, it's subject to a redistribution regulatory function of the ERC as well. So, with this draft rules and regulations that we have, we're trying also to address that scenario.
Because you will have a scenario wherein many buildings will put their own charging stations. So all buildings will now if you will regulate that, and all of them will now apply for rates to the ERC. And dami yan. So baka we might come up with there'll be problems in approving all of those entities.
We will consider that one, Your Honor, in drafting this proposed rules.
And in other jurisdictions, they package it. Maybe si Raymond can comment on this. For example, may mga novelty or very innovative ways of charging the consumers. For example, a monthly fee or a yearly fee. So it's bundled up with many things. So if you regulate it, it's not purely rates that being charged to the customers. If they bundle it with other things, but it might be very difficult to regulate the rates itself. So that's why we agreed internally that yung rates lang between DU and the charging station ang i-regulate. Pero yung charging station to the consumer, laban-laban na yan, because they might come up with many things. For example, Meralco will package it with other things. Or if SM will put their charging station, sige, mag-charge ka dito, bigyan kita ng coupon sa Save More. Things like that. So how do you now regulate those type of offerings?
Actually, we will as of now, personally, I don't have any idea about that, but we will take that into consideration, as what I've mentioned earlier, in the drafting of the proposed rules. Now, probably we can incorporate also the intent of the bill, which is also not to regulate the rates from the charging station down to basically the end user, which is the electric vehicle.
And legally, the charging stations are not utilities per se. No? They might be an extension, but they're not like sa Isakay, nakahiwalay sila eh. No? Raymond, any
No, that's true, Mr. Chair. To your point, there are many models to charge a consumer. It could be time-based, it could be kilowatt-hour based, it could be, you know, an only charge option for a period of time, say a month, a week, a day. And you're right, entities who enter this business can be utilities, it can also be non-utilities. So it's I think whatever makes most sense to drive. Again, the objective is to drive EV adoption. So one way or another, I think we should choose the option that best drives that EV adoption.
I would like to ask the ERC to research some more. No? I think there are many models, and admittedly, this is a relatively young industry in many jurisdictions. So the models are also iba-iba no? in different countries. But I agree with Raymond that the goal really is the adoption. No? The adoption. So we don't want to also constrain the industry too much. It might affect the adoption of the electric vehicles. So, yeah.
Noted, Your Honor.
Yeah, thank you. Transco, any comments po? Transco.
Good afternoon, everybody. Maybe, Mr. Chair, we could look onto the as part as Transco is concerned, no. So, since na yung electricity ang ginagamit ng electric vehicle as to drive the vehicle itself, maybe we could look onto the how much electricity consumes by these electric vehicles and the effect of this on our grid. So we can look onto the assurance that the grid could sustain or deliver its power and quality to the customers. So in terms of power quality and supply reliability. So maybe we could include this, just like the NGCP said, in the inclusion to TDP for the additional facilities needed.
Thank you, Engineer. Sa BOI, any comments po, BOI?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and congratulations for Senate Bill 2137, which the DTI and the Board of Investment support because we see the objectives to protect the well-being and improve the socio-economic condition of Filipinos, as well as promote energy independence and security in the midst of climate change and technological developments. The auto industry, including the e-vehicle sector, is one of the 12 priority sectors of the BOI under its Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategy, where government promotes the adoption of Industry 4.0 in the sectors. And currently, under the 27 Investments Priorities Plan, actually the manufacture of e-vehicles and its parts and components are among the priority sectors, including, sir, the operation of charging stations, and we also have a listing on environment or climate change related projects. So we have been working closely with local industries and other stakeholders to promote the use of clean transport technology by assisting the e-vehicle industry and promoting their usage. And in line with this, the DTI-BOI has forged a partnership with EVAP in promoting and realizing the action plans and proposed strategies of the Roadmap 2014-2024. Also, as part of our promotions, in 2017, in coordination with EVAP, CAMPI, and Meralco, we were able to organize the first ASEAN Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Summit, which promoted the Philippines as a potential hub for e-vehicles manufacturing. And during that summit, the establishment of the ASEAN Federation of Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Industries was also initiated to serve as the unified voice of the ASEAN electric and hybrid vehicles industry. There are also some collaborations that BOI has entered into with foreign partners to share knowledge and technology on e-vehicles, such as the MOU with the South Korean government, and we have also introduced some Chinese battery associations to the local industry. As part of there are some recommendations and comments we have on the proposed legislation. So on Section 4, the definition of terms, we would like to propose the inclusion of the definition of completely knocked down units. To read, completely knocked down parts and components refer to vehicle parts and components that are either locally produced or imported for assembly purposes. The imported CKD shall refer to subparts, parts, and sub-assemblies, assemblies, components, minus local parts and components. This is in accordance with the BOI Memorandum Circular number 2018-04 series of 2018. On Section 7, the role of the DTI, we support that the role of DTI in crafting the standards for e-vehicles, battery packs, charging stations, and other associated equipment. This function will be handled by the Bureau of Philippine Standards, which will support the infrastructure development for e-vehicles and charging stations. As to the provision on fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, we recommend that only the manufacture and or assembly of electric vehicles and charging stations and manufacture or assembly of completely knocked down parts of e-vehicles and construction of charging stations be provided with fiscal incentives. As we are promoting industry development, the local production, so that we can provide the much needed local employment opportunities. And this will also contribute to a wide range of activities of other sectors, including plastics, rubbers, metals, metalworking, and chemicals industries, not just the EV industry itself. And that's why we welcome this, because you're looking at the whole ecosystem. We are actually, sir, studying a possible crafting of an e-vehicle incentive program akin to the CARS program, wherein we provided incentives to promote the sector's development and growth in the local market. Hence, sir, we would like to recommend the inclusion of provision on Section 9, which would say that the Board of Investment shall craft a special incentive subsidy program to develop the local e-vehicle industry that will include fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. Further, we would like to recommend that the grant of the fiscal and non-fiscal incentives be based on the proposed 3-year Strategic Investments Priorities Plan to be formulated by BOI in consultation with the relevant agencies in the discussions of the Trabajo Bill. So it will have an industries, it will have the identification of industries for inclusion in the Strategic Investment Priorities Plan, which will be in accordance with current government priorities and programs. And sir, on the creation of an electric vehicle roadmap by the DOE, we'd like to partner with the EVA for an e-vehicle roadmap, which runs beyond the current roadmap for up to 2024 only. And we'd like this to be aligned with all the other agencies that will be doing the roadmap to avoid duplication and formulating instead a continuous action and strategic plan. We strongly propose that DTI BOI be included in the working group so that we can also provide our inputs to the roadmap. And then, sir, we recommend for a unified regulatory framework or policy that will enable the growth and promotion of e-vehicles in the Philippines. Based on the e-vehicle study consultation that was held in December 2018, the development of the e-vehicle industry in the Philippines will require strong collaboration of concerned government agencies together with the private sector with identified responsibilities of the government agencies. So some of the responsibilities, sir, that were raised were on the standards on battery, charging, and power quality. The government agencies to be involved should be DOE and the Bureau of Philippine Standards. On the standards on performance, measurement, and communications, this should be DOST, DICT, and DOE. Standards on safety and protection requirement, DENR, and again, the Bureau of Philippine Standards. Type approval, DOTr and DOST. And then on the standards on battery disposal, the Department of DENR. Finally, sir, we recommend further study on the provision of fiscal incentives that should adhere to the principles of being time-bound, performance-based, targeted in consideration of the e-vehicle promotion activities. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director. I understand that yung e-vehicles and charging station is already included in the IPP. So, ibig sabihin ngayon, if you are going to manufacture e-vehicles and charging stations, you can now avail of incentives under the BOI law. Is that correct? Okay. Importation of vehicles, hindi kasali.
We have under the MVDP, we have importation of CKD at 1%, but kaya sir, medyo konti lang yung nag-a-avail nun because it has a investment requirement, investment commitment. So if it's a four-wheel, there should be an investment of $8 million. For two wheels, 2 million, and for commercial vehicle, 10 million. So,
when you import ng
sir, to be registered
okay,
under the Motor Vehicle Development Program so that you can avail of the lower import duty.
duties.
Kasi sir, pag hindi ka doon, pag CBU yung in-import mo, it's at 40% if it's MFN. So, para ma-register ka, sir, one of the requirements should be an investment commitment. So, medyo prohibitive siguro siya. So, hindi sila dun sa MVDP. Sa EO 226 naman, sir, meron isang nag-try mag-register for a charging station, except that it's foreign majority owned. So if it's foreign majority owned, the technology should be pioneering. Unless it is all for export or majority for export. But the market was really targeted to the domestic market, so it had to be pioneering. Unfortunately, the proposed technology, according to DOST, is not anymore new in the Philippines. That's why we're not able to register it. But I think it is now in operation or in business. Kasi pwede naman, sir, talaga silang mag-operate, but it's just that we are not able to provide the
incentive.
incentives.
So, kailan po pinasok sa IPP itong e-vehicles manufacturing and charging station manufacturing? Anong year?
I think since, yes, it is not the first time that it was included.
Okay.
I think it has been some years na rin, sir, that it has been in the IPP.
And ever since it was included, ilan po ang nag-avail?
On our record, sir, we only have 12.
Ang nag-avail o nag-apply?
Nag-register with
Nag-register.
BOI.
But ilan ang nag-avail? Kasi nag-register sila, di ba? But not
sir.
all of them pursued the project or they pursued the project.
Ayun, sir, ang hindi ko na-check. But our assumption is that the 12 that registered were interested with the income tax holiday. So if they were earning, they had income, then it was
These
would be
are
expected.
e-vehicles manufacturing
Yes, sir.
companies, no?
Yes.
I think they want to take advantage or enter the public utility vehicle market, I would assume.
Teka, sir, ito yung aking technical.
Mga tricycles,
Mostly-
e-jeeps,
Mostly three-wheels, sir, e-trikes.
e-trikes sila. Ilan doon ang nag-ooperate ngayon doon sa 12?
Ilan? But I know, sir, sa Boracay.
Sila,
Dimac
Mr.
and Gerwise, right? In Boracay are doing well in Boracay.
So they are, like si Mr. Yamasaki is a BOI registered.
Yes, sir. BEMAC is registered with BOI.
Okay, so obviously they're operating and they're taking advantage of the incentives.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And any constraint po na naririnig nyo regarding dito sa we want to have more, no, more than 12. So what are the constraints that the proponents are
Yun nga
echoing?
siguro, sir, kasi kukonti rin yung, it was mentioned by the good gentleman there that because siguro the prices are quite prohibitive. So, konti lang din yung market pa nila. And that's why we want the subsidy program like a la cars to force a supply. Di ba, sir, yung sa cars, we have 3 participants. Right now, we have only 2. We require them to produce 200,000 cars in a span of 6 years, and then we will be giving them incentives that are performance-based and meron ding fixed. And that would require also a commitment on their part to localize some of the parts, the big parts. That's what we want to happen in the EV industry.
What are the salient points of the CARS program that we can, I'm thinking of maybe picking some of those salient points and including it in the bill. What are the, if that is your chain of thought?
Kaya nga, sir, yung aming yung proposal na lang namin is that we be tasked to create that program,
The program,
CARS,
okay.
for the EV industry.
And you mentioned earlier there's a EV incentive program in the works right now.
We are studying it already,
Okay.
sir.
Nag-umpisa na ho.
Opo.
And then meron ba kayong pwedeng ma-share in that study program?
Wala pa.
So very initial stage
Yes,
rin.
sir.
Okay. All
But
right.
we want that to, but we really want to have that, sir, kasi if we want to have an EV industry, pwede sigurong yung ipuwersa, katulad nung sa cars na kailangan meron kayong 200,000. So that will create the demand.
So we will now task the BOI/DTI to come up with
That
that
subsidy
type of
incentive
program.
Apo.
Okay, to enhance the development.
Yes, sir.
All right. Before we continue, let's take a 2-minute break. Thank you. Right, let's take our seats. Let's take our respective seats, and we have a few more resource persons to ask their opinion. Our next is DTI, sir, engineer.
We would like to add something, sir. Before anything else, I would like to greet everybody a very good afternoon. The Bureau of Philippine Standard advocating the Sustainable Development Goal, support and congratulate the Honorable Chairperson for the filing of the bill, because we identified 6 Sustainable Development Goals that will be addressed, namely the eradication of poverty. Second is the good health. Third is the affordable and clean energy. Fourth is the industry innovation infrastructure. Fifth is the sustainable city, and the last is the climate action. We would like to inform the Honorable Chairperson that the Bureau of Philippine Standards, we have an active technical committee on the development of different related standards for the related e-vehicles and hybrid vehicles, sir. So as of now, we have at least 40 standards, voluntary standards that might be used by our regulator to be referred in their technical regulations. We have the standards for battery, protection of persons inside and outside the e-vehicle, vehicle operational safety and protection against failures, protection against electric hazard, post-cast electricity safety, all in under the PNS 6469-1 hanggang Part 4. We also have standards for charging stations. We also have standards for fuel cell road vehicles, hybrid electrical road vehicles, electric vehicle charging system, electrical vehicle, lithium-ion battery packs, electric vehicle, and many others. We will submit the list to the Honorable Chairperson, sir. This might be used by our regulatory agency involved in the implementation of electronic vehicle and hybrid vehicles, sir.
Thank you, Engineer. DPWH, any comments po, Engineer Reyes?
Ang may dadagdag lang siguro sa ng aming departamento, sir, tungkol po dito sa EV vehicles ay yung sana po hindi ito makadagdag sa congestion natin, especially along national roads. Kasi po ang nakikita po namin sa mga e-trikes ngayon na gumagamit sa ating mga national roads ay isa sila sa nakakalala ng congestion. So siguro i-identify natin yung mga right routes na dapat nilang kung saan sila dapat bumiyahe, not hampering the traffic flow, especially along national roads. At saka siguro yung safety ng hindi ko pa for me, sir, hindi ko pa nakikita talaga yung actual na itsura ng electronic jeepney, kung paano sila paano ang safety ng passengers sa pag-load and unload ng passengers. At saka yung pag-identify ng mga stations where they can safely load and unload passengers, dapat po ma-identify din kung paano sila makikipagkompetensya sa mga existing public utility vehicles. Ang tanong ko lang, sir, dito sa pilot natin, dito sa e-vehicles, ito ba ay replacement ng mga existing vehicles natin? Kasi kung idadagdag natin sa mga existing public utility vehicles, baka lalo tayong mamroblema sa issues on congestions.
Actually, Engineer, ang kailangan namin sa DPWH yung comment on the building code. No, because we are now requiring installation of charging station in parking lots, establishments, and this will be now be mandated. No, so since ang building official is under the DPWH, we want DPWH to comment on that, no? Kung meron pong effect po sa building code ho natin.
Good, sir. Siguro ipaparating ko po sa
Kayo
management.
po ba ang under the building official?
Ay, hindi po, sir. I am from the Bureau of Quality and Safety. So,
Okay.
focus po ko po doon sa effect on congestions and safety.
Okay, but I think more importantly is the installation of the charging station in private and public buildings dito po sa Section 12. And sinasabi kasi rin ho namin dito na dapat mandato na ho ang charging station sa mga buildings and establishments. No?
Sige po, sir. Ipaparating ko na lang po.
And we want that to be part of the building code. No?
Sige po, sir.
Yeah. So that's what we pakitingin na lang ho yan because ang DPWH, ang Office of the Building Official is under the DPWH.
Yes, sir.
No?
Okay.
Okay. PCC, any comment?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. The Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry has no...
CCI or PCC?
PCCI.
Okay.
Sir, yeah.
Kala ko PCC.
The Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry has no position yet, as we would like to understand the bill before we send out our position paper. A report of this hearing shall be submitted to our Energy Committee and will be reported at the board meeting tomorrow.
LTO? Ma'am, may dadagdag kayo, attorney?
Yes, sir. Would like to add that yung observation kanina on no power rating, tsaka yung number of cylinders, we are updating now our motor vehicle details and customer details with our new LTO IT system, which will be rolled out in the next couple of months. So we will include that in the specifications that we are giving our new provider. Thank you, sir.
And attorney, and may mga EVAP can comment on this, no? If someone imports, let's say, a Tesla, can that be registered in LTO? It was registered, and I think the problem here is, according to the stakeholders, iba yata yung understanding ng customs, iba yung understanding ng ibang agency.
Yes, sir.
Kaya pagdating sa inyo, iba-iba yung dokumento na hawak ninyo na hindi nyo magamit. Is that the problem? It can be registered, yes, but after going through a very difficult process of getting your documents.
The motor vehicle classification is not harmonized, Mr.
Correct.
Chair. So we are...
So may problema tayong ganun.
Yes, Mr. Chair. But
So we
we
need to
are...
fix that. We need to harmonize the entire government.
Yes, Mr.
process.
Chair, and the LTO for its part, with its new IT, we are now going to use the motor vehicle classification by the DTI. So LM, and we will be using that, and we will no longer use our old motor vehicle classifications. But before we adapt that in our new IT, we will be issuing advisories on the counterpart classification as they are now, so that the public will be informed.
What you're saying is DTI now will come up with a motor vehicle classification.
They already have, Mr.
Meron na.
Chair.
And that's being used.
Susundin na lang po namin.
So hindi nyo pa sinusunod ngayon?
Magkakaiba po. Tama po si Sir. Magkakaiba po yung mga agencies, Mr. Chair.
So but ngayon, itong motor vehicle classification, is it being used by LTO right now? As
We have
speak?
a different classification, Mr. Chair.
So you have a different classification from what they have?
Yes, Mr. Chair. But we can identify the counterpart classification in
Correct.
the DTI language.
But what they're saying is DTI now will issue that classification that will be used in the various government agencies.
Sir, we are now harmonizing our classification as per the requirement of the United Nations regulations because international po yung language ng DTI. So, as of now, we are now yun po, nag-uusap na po ang government agency, lahat ng involved sa development standards, na gumamit lang ng isang language sa classification ng vehicles.
Sino mag-dictate kung anong language? Is it DTI? Is it LTO?
So we have international standards for the classification.
Okay.
So yun po yung dapat basic po yun sa lahat.
So basic yun sa lahat?
Yes, sir.
No, but from what I'm saying, nasabi nga ni Mr. Bona kanina, na nare-registro nga, pero yung dadaanan mo naman, parang dumaan ka sa ano?
Yun po yung problema, kaya po, yung observation ni Mr. Bona is very valid because nahihirapan po talaga yung magpaparehistro kapag magpaparehistro sa kanila dahil maaari pong hindi nila i-register because hindi po pasok sa definition.
Classification under the language that we use. But now we will be adhering to the international classification that DTI is using.
But that's only specifically for electric vehicles?
No, sir, for all types of motor vehicles.
Okay, but for purposes of this legislation, is it more prudent to just include that so that mandato na? It's mandatory na to the government, various government agencies to use that international classification?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the DTI can give the proper classification under which the electric vehicle will
So
fall.
sasabihin ng DTI, ito yung classification natin for electric vehicles, BOC, ito gamitin nyo, LTO, ito gamitin nyo, LTFRB, ito gamitin nyo. Is that a more prudent methodology so that the users of e-vehicles will not have a hard time?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Is that something that you see necessary in the bill? Kasi wala kaming linagay na ganun dito eh.
Actually, on the Technical Committee 44 that we have right now, interagency na po yun. We have representative from the DOTr, from DTI, from DNR, from the Board of Investment. So, nag-uusap na po to harmonize the definition classifications of the motor vehicle.
But I think it's more prudent to put that here in the bill, no? Para hindi naman mahirapan. I mean, we want to promote, no? And we have to fix the bureaucracy in order to promote, or else we're promoting and then it's very difficult for the private sector to register or to talk to government, no? Yeah. Right. Anything
We
else,
agree.
Attorney?
That would be all,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Sa MMDA, I'm sure traffic rin sasabihin mo, no?
Hindi naman po. The agency fully supports the draft bill by Your Honor. Isip po namin is one way of providing incentive is yung through the exempting these e-vehicles from the number coding scheme. For the information of the body, sir, this policy was floated as early as 2011, pero wala pang critical mass din. And at the same time, the e-vehicle is in infancy. So we agree with the suggestion of Yusek Mark De Leon that as the bill develops, we try to develop more proposals for incentive for the not only for the motor vehicle user but also for the manufacturers.
But you're open to that?
Of course, sir. As early as 2011, mga sir, nag-iisip na kami kaya lang during that time, talagang hindi pa siya talaga uso eh. Kahit na i-propose sa council, wala pa namang masyadong e-vehicle at noong 2011. But for now, maybe as the bill develops nga po, maybe we can add more incentive and we'll try to look deeper into the bill pag na-improve na po based on sa suggestion ng body.
How about LTFRB? Any comments po?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The LTFRB strongly support the bill. As mentioned by our Undersecretary, we have already have the omnibus franchising guidelines, and one of the requirement is an alternative type of fuel, which includes the e-vehicle. In fact, since the signing of that department order, we have already at least 75 units running on the routes opened by LTFRB and the DOTr using e-vehicle, including Boracay, the Isakay, and in Tacloban, and in Iloilo City. So, as to the question of the DPW, if we will just add it, the program of the DOTr and in the modernization, we will replace the old unit by this new unit. So we'll definitely eliminating this old unit and change it with the new unit, including the e-vehicle. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Yusek, I have another question. Based on your, since I think you're more attuned to this e-vehicle sector, in other countries, what are the best practices, that other countries implemented so that the adoption will be faster? Other than subsidies, I know subsidies is being used by other countries, but definitely subsidies will be very difficult here in our country. So other than direct subsidies, what are the best practices that they have implemented?
Aside from the other incentives that I mentioned earlier, like free parking, other countries has implemented yung company-wide implementation of electric vehicles. Like the company itself will provide the electric vehicles to the employees of the company. So kung yung mga malalaking establishments like 1,000 plus employees, instead of them providing ordinary car combustion engine na tawag dito, service vehicle, yun yung mga binibigay nila, electric vehicle. So mas mabilis yung uptake ng electric vehicle. So yung company na rin yung nagpo-provide ng tawag doon, mga charging stations dun sa kanilang mga garages, sa mga parking lots.
Tingin ko mahirap ma-implement dito sa atin yun, or is that something that, how do you envision implementing that here in our country?
It's one of the possible na pwede nating discuss with the private sector. And aside from that, yung mga on public transportation, I saw in the earlier slides of Dr. Biona na he recommended that certain public transport routes be considered as purely for electric vehicle usage only. So, yun yung isa sa mga magagandang possible na application of electric vehicles.
So, yung mga new routes?
Yes. New routes or routes that are really fit.
Green routes, parang ganyan, green routes.
Fit for electric vehicles, like routes that are relatively flat areas, or yung mga hindi naman malaki yung matagal yung usage, like kapag gabi pwedeng magpahinga na yung electric vehicle kasi magcha-charge na siya. So yung ganong sistema.
Anyone who wants to comment, Professor
If I may reinforce that suggestion, yung selected routes na yan, basically referring to routes that have high population density exposure. Kasi pinaka-ano talaga ng electric vehicles is yung low health impact niya. So for example, CBDs, okay, those would be very good. If you can lock in all CBD routes into electrics, that provides you also a lot of health benefits. And then paikot-ikot siya, logistics would be easier. So highly selected routes muna. Then maybe later on, then it competes for market-based competition for some other routes. But initially, if you can lock in CBD routes.
Any best practices from other countries?
It's mostly subsidies, and for some countries, it's government providing the market. Okay, initially, because that solves the question of chicken and the egg.
What do you mean government? Government buying the vehicle?
Yeah, government buying the vehicle, they allot a certain percentage of their vehicle purchases to electric. So with that, you create you start to create the market, and at the same time, you create the market also for the charging facilities. So that starts everything. Now once you have the charging facilities, the public will now be more encouraged to buy electric vehicles, and if they see a lot of electric vehicles on the ground, okay, then the adoption will be now exponential.
Any idea on the best practices?
Frankly, Mr. Chair, the terms that you've included in the proposed bill capture a great majority of the incentives we've seen abroad, and I think I echo what the good professor and the USEC have mentioned. In fact, we are doing a little bit of that today with the developmental routes that the LTFRB, for instance, is publishing. And these are really for the modern Jeeps or modern vehicles. But I think, again, financing is also a big part of the equation. Today, the financing packages, as I mentioned, is limited to four-wheeled vehicles. what we see as a big challenge are the three-wheeled vehicles, the tricycles. So if we can come up with a similar package for tricycles, I think that would be a big help, just to ease the burden of the upfront cost.
Yes. Director?
Yes, we found this article on January 24, 2009. The Chinese central government initiated the 10 cities, 1,000 vehicles program to stimulate the adoption of the NEVs or the new e-vehicles. So, meron sila Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing. They were selected as the cities for the demonstration and promotion of NEVs. Each city was challenged to roll out pilots of at least 1,000 EVs. And then in July 2010, the pilot cities of NEV demonstrated were increased to 30. And then the program was further expanded from focusing on government fleet applications to include private consumers in Shanghai, Changchun, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, and Hefei. Sir, ganun. By city siya, sir.
Tapos government ano yan? Procurement.
Tapos government procurement po. Nangyari.
So government will buy the vehicles.
Yes.
I think that's what Professor Bona mentioned. I don't know if it's, we're thinking of probably adding, mandating government to buy 10% of their vehicles, something to that effect. Is that, Yusek, is that something we can work on?
We can probably pilot in some of the routes, siguro, sir.
And then maybe, I think another thing I got from this hearing is for lack of a better term, green routes. Maybe LTFRB through DOTr can dedicate or declare a route, for example, for e-vehicles. No? New or old. Pag old, awa yan, gera yan. Rally sigurado makikita natin dyan. But I think for new, for example, there's a new route and then it's there's a demand, they can declare it as a green route, and jeeps, independent jeeps or yung mga operators ng jeeps can apply using e-vehicles. No? So I think we can all come up with some innovative concepts to include in the bill so that other than fiscal incentives, which DOF obviously is not so inclined, but at least yung mga ibang non-fiscal that we can come up with in order to promote e-vehicles. No? Sabi nyo kanina may UNDP study, pero 2020 pa matatapos?
Yes, Mr. Chair, but
we will gawin 2019.
We will strive for immediate outcomes this 2019, sir.
Yeah.
So if we can already identify some pilot projects, and I believe the study done by Dr. Biona under DTI has already identified some initial steps, no, under the roadmap. We can already put some details in that strategies.
Yeah, if we can have some preliminary output so we can include it in the bill, no? Para po at least we can, because if we wait for the study, it might take long, no? But we want to include that in the bill. In fact, in the bill calls for a roadmap, no, to be crafted by the DOE, no. With that, any last question, Director?
Sir, sa ecosystem din pala, one of the requirements would be testing facilities, especially for electromagnetic compatibility.
For the whole vehicle, sir, the EMC.
And then, sir, I don't know how we will be able to mandate it, but we also need a mechanism that for collecting data. So,
and budget.
Included that in the bill, but DOE ang mangongolekta ho.
Kasi sir, hirap
Yeah. Of course, the data collection is important because we all claim lilinis in environment, bababa oil importation, but we need to, obviously we need to measure that, no? Or else we're just doing something that wala naman pong concrete advantages, no?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Would like to pick up on what you were thinking. A government vehicle acquisition. If you're saying 10%, why not 50% of all new vehicles that they will requisition? Because that's where the chicken and egg can be broken. the quandary is, that will stimulate definitely a market which will be more or less predictable. So we're thinking 10% is too small, maybe a little higher, and on the acquisition of the new vehicles, and
So-
phase out of their old vehicles.
I think Campi will agree, somebody say Campi, that government is probably the biggest vehicle buyer of the country.
Exactly.
No, so if government will initiate the process, then I think other companies can follow suit. No?
Oh, another point is, in other countries, they exempt the EVs from paying toll fees.
Mm. Okay.
Because that's a very big cost to the commercial vehicles.
Sister company ng Meralco ho yun. Baka pwede nilang i-package na yun. Pag nag-charge ka, libre na yung toll fee mo.
Not necessarily free, but points or whatever.
Well, that's the thing that I was saying, no? Baka since at least sa amin, most sa NLEX, ang may-ari nun is sister company ng Meralco, they can package it. If you charge with Meralco, you get free toll free, at least papuntang Valenzuela. No? Ilibre nyo na ho yun. No? So, but those are the things that, based on our research, a lot of these third-party charging stations, they package many things. So, so that the adoption is faster. No? But those are, maybe we can also look at those things to be included. No? Any last comments po before we adjourn? Kung wala naman po, I would like to just remind the different government agencies here. First of all, DOE, yung research po, director on the advantages of electric vehicles, and also a roadmap from your end. The advantages, it has to be quantifiable, or else it's very difficult to convince people that this is actually beneficial or wala naman pong benefit. And then DOTr, the research, we're urging you to give us some preliminary outputs that we can use in the bill. Maganda ho yun kung meron ng mga preliminary outputs. But from your presentation earlier, we can pick up a lot of things already. So we can include that. ERC, also the regulatory model for this type of technology. As I mentioned to you earlier, in our bill, it doesn't call for regulation, no? But we want to also listen to your inputs and also your analysis. And also, there's a comment that paano kung yung charging station is powered by solar, no? How do we treat that?
Actually, sir, yung draft rule namin basically captures yung charging station having a self-generating facilities.
That's not regulated anymore.
That will be regulated, Your Honor. It's either kasi the charging station will get its supply from the existing DU, or on top of that, meron siyang sariling generating facilities within its premises.
Okay, but kung ganon, will that be regulated by ERC?
Based on the proposed rules, sir, yes, it will be regulated under the regulatory function.
When you would say regulated, that the fee being charged to the customers should be approved.
Yes, Your Honor.
And my fear there is we want to scatter charging station all over the country, you know, and the entities can be as big as Meralco, can be as small as a building owner. So that's our concern. The application will be ang daming application niya. And I know the biggest problem now of ERC is the bottleneck. You know? So you have to really think about that issue, no, for practicality purposes.
Noted, Your Honor.
And also the PWH, ma'am, yung sa building code, there's also a provision here that will impact on the building code, so we need your comments on that. And the others, we welcome your position paper, your comments. Like I said, this is a work in progress. We're gathering inputs and suggestions from the stakeholders, So kung meron ho kayong mga naisip pang gustong idagdag, feel free to send it to us. Hopefully on or before April 1, which is 2 weeks from now. No? We plan to finalize the bill, and hopefully when we convene here in the Senate, we can report it out. All right, so with that, thank you very much for your time. Maraming salamat po. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.